All right, good evening and welcome to our virtual Committee of Adjustment meeting. I apologize for the delay. We're having some technical issues on our back end, but this live video, so that's what you can expect. Well, on your screen, you're going to see members of our Committee of Adjustment. Now, behind the scenes, we have many staff members with us this evening, and even though you won't see them, you will hear them chime in from time to time. Our Secretary-Treasurer is Anne-Marie Eusebio, and we also have clerks James Thompson and Derek O'Shea, who are hosting the meeting and running the Zoom platform from behind the scenes. For sure, they are authorized to interrupt the meeting as the need arises. Now, the agenda and the schedules for this meeting have been posted on Dash on the city's website, and if you don't have those documents and you'd like to follow along, you might want to access them now. So we have 6 agenda items this evening, and I'd like to share with you the format that I'm going to be using to navigate through each application. I'll start by introducing an application, and then I'll call on the applicant to introduce themselves. Then I'll give the applicant or their agent an opportunity to add anything further. If you are the applicant or the agent and you have nothing further to add, then simply say so. Next, I'm going to invite members of the committee to ask questions of either the applicant or of staff. Then I'll open the public portion of the meeting. It's at that time I'm going to invite members of the public to raise their virtual hand in Zoom if they have any questions or comments in respect of an application. Now, if you do have a question or if you wish to make a comment, please don't expect an immediate answer, because it's during this public portion of the meeting that we will be recording your questions and comments, and only after I close the public portion of the meeting will your questions and comments be addressed by the applicant, their agent, or by staff. To be sure, I'll call 3 times for public comments before I close the public portion of the meeting. Next, I'll invite the applicant or staff to address the public comments, after which I'll ask the committee to make a motion and deliberate on the application. At that time, if you're the applicant, you'll be free to leave the meeting. Then we just rinse and we repeat, because I'm going to be using the same format for every application this evening. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Now, if you have a personal interest in any particular application and would like to receive written notice of tonight's decision, then please send an email with your name and address to our Secretary-Treasurer, Anne-Marie Eusebio. Her email address is aeusebio@cityofkingston.ca. So now I'm going to call the meeting to order at 5:52 p.m. and I'm going to refer you to the agenda. So committee members, can I call for a motion to approve the agenda? So moved by Paul and seconded by Vincent. All in favor, raise your hands, and that would be carried. Okay, next, we'll look at the first agenda item, which is I'm sorry, I'll just back up here. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest this evening? If not, shake your head no. Okay, so I see no disclosures of pecuniary interest. There are no delegations and there are no requests for deferral this evening. So next, we're going to look at our returning deferred items. And the first one we have is item 6A, which is an application for consent. Anne-Marie, can I have you introduce this for us, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first returning deferred item is an application for consent for 163 Union Street. The owner is Magdalene Karkulis and the applicant is Photon Consultants. The purpose and effect of the 2 consent applications are to facilitate the creation of 2 new residential lots. One lot will have 11.5 meters of frontage on Union Street, and the second lot will have 10.9 meters of frontage on Albert Street. The retained lot will contain the existing house. I leave this in your hands.
Great, thank you very much. And so do we have the applicant, if we could have the applicant and or their agent identify themselves by name and address for the record, please?
Good evening, Mr. Chair. My name is Yuko Leclerc. I'm a land use planner with Photon Planning and Design, and I am here this evening acting as an agent for the applicant. My office address is the Woolen Mill, Suite 108. So that's 6 Cataraqui Street.
It's
Sorry, I am here with the applicant this evening, Mr. John Sotiriadis, and our heritage consultant, Mr. Andre Scheinman, is here as well.
Very good. So do you have anything further you want to add to the application or the documents we have before us this evening?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not in particular, but I would like to note that I have, for the committee's benefit, that I've read the staff report and the public comments that have been previously provided. And I do agree with the recommendation from city staff to approve the 2 applications for consent because they meet the Planning Act tests for land division by consent. They are consistent with the provincial policy statement. They conform to the City of Kingston's official plan, in particular policies in the official plan that seek to encourage neighborhood intensification through infill and the compatibility of the resulting lot fabric, and that they would not have any adverse effect on adjacent residential lot uses or residential land uses or on the neighborhood character as a whole. I also note that the proposed consents, the 2 severed lots, comply with the zoning bylaw in their entirety. I agree with the recommended conditions of approval that are set out in the staff report. And I do note that there are a number of additional conditions that are recommended for these 2 consents, which reflect the complexity of the applications. They're a little bit more complicated than your typical land severance in the city's urban area, and the conditions of approval reflect that.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so now I'll turn it over to the committee members. Do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff? And if you do, raise your virtual hand. So Paul? Just unmute your mic.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate this. And I certainly appreciate the opportunity to have this item deferred from April. I think we had some comments from the public, and one of them had to do with vegetation. It was hard to see vegetation in April as it was just coming about. My question is really to staff, and my question has to do with the heritage designation of this address at 163 Union. Perhaps staff could speak to that. Thank you.
Yes, and so staff?
Just 1 second, Mr. Chair. I believe we will turn to Mr. Leary, who's the heritage planner. Go ahead, Mr. Leary.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would ask the member to sort of explain his question. The property is designated under Part 4. What further would you like to know?
So Mr. Leary, my question is it the property that's designated heritage, or is it the building, the house itself?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Ryan Leary. I'm the city's heritage planner. Yes, the property is designated. A heritage designation is registered on title of the holding. And in this particular case, the severance won't impact that. All 3 of the new lots, if approved, will continue to retain that heritage designation status.
So my question, if I may, Mr. Chair, is because there was a heritage impact statement prepared by the owner or the consultants, this did not go to the Heritage Committee. It went to staff. And I'm wondering why it did not go to Kingston Heritage for comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Ontario Heritage Act does not require their approval for Planning Act applications. And so there's no formal process for the Heritage Committee to be involved with the Planning Act application. And it's our practice that these matters are addressed at a staff level. So myself and the Heritage team reviews Heritage impact statements and provide comment as you have in your agenda package from a Heritage impact perspective. I would add, this is an interesting particular case because the property will retain its heritage status. Both of these new houses, if approved, will be subject to heritage permits themselves. So this Heritage Committee, as the advisory body to council, will be looking at, as well as staff, the appropriateness and heritage impacts of these new buildings in relation to the heritage attributes and characteristics of the property. And they'll be advising council on that as part of the heritage permit process and the approval process under the Heritage Act.
So just one more question, Mr. Chair, is to staff. There seems to be a concern by the neighbor around the vegetation between this property and 151 Union, in that it's they specifically mention 100-year-old trees along the border. And I'm just wondering, is this part of the heritage designation? Is vegetation part of the designation?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the Heritage Act is a pretty powerful tool, but this particular designation does not speak to the trees themselves. So they're really outside of the purview of the heritage permit, which is why heritage staff and planning staff in general are recommending a development agreement as part of a condition of approval for this file. And that way we can try to retain as much of those mature trees and that buffer between the subject heritage resource, the 163, and the neighboring heritage resource property. It will help soften that impact of a new house in that location. So that's a primary reason why we're asking for a heritage agreement as a condition of approval here.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from the committee? None, I don't see any. Okay, so at this point now I'll open the public portion of the meeting, and I'm going to ask, are there any members of the public here this evening to speak to the application for 163 Union Street? If so, please raise your virtual hand in Zoom, and then we can allow you to speak in.
Sure. Mr. Chair, there's 2 members that wish to speak initially, and I believe there's 2 people at the 1 account, so we'll start there.
Okay, sure.
And I'll just ask that people provide their name and address before they start their statement.
Very good.
Go ahead.
Can you hear us? My name is
Yeah.
Dr. Sarah Gibson-Gray. I'm a co-owner of 151 Union Street West with my brother, John Gibson. And I appreciate an opportunity to speak today. As a co-owner, following our mother's recent death before Christmas, prior to that, my mother, who died at age 95, had lived in the house since she was married, and my father grew up there, as you know. First of all, I would very much like to thank the chair and committees and staff of the Committee of Adjustment for agreeing during the virtual meeting in April 20th, to take the time over the past 8 weeks to re-examine more closely the proposals for 2 new lots at 163 Union Street, in light of our family's multiple concerns detailed in 2 previous letters to the committee. As owners at 151 Union Street, the adjacent property most directly affected by these proposed lots, we have expressed serious concerns regarding danger posed to the numerous rare and mature trees, as was just discussed, on the shared boundary, loss of privacy, traffic safety, shadowing, and the loss of a heritage setting, the gardens and grounds for a designated house. Whereas the only other adjacent neighbor is just north of 163 Union's garage on Albert Street, and recently has been converted from a family home to a student house, 151 Union Street is, and always has been, a family house. It is our wish to keep it a family house and an anchor of stability in this old and eclectic neighborhood. 163 and 151 Union Street are each in their own way unique and distinctive houses surrounded with lush gardens and grounds, as is demonstrated by their City of Kingston heritage designations. Both houses and their surrounding grounds contribute significantly to Kingston's rich, historic, varied, and vibrant architectural legacy, qualities to be nurtured and not to be taken for granted. Kingston is not your average city, as you will know if you have, as I have, lived elsewhere, if you've traveled or spoken with tourists and visitors to Kingston. And Kingston's unique historical legacy deserves preservation. Combined with its wonderful lake and river, the green spaces, it's this historical element, among other things, that makes Kingston such a beautiful and special and interesting city. I would once again respectfully ask the Committee of Adjustment to turn down proposed lot number 1 and seriously reconsider and consider refusing lot number 2. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thanks for your comments. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak to the application for 163 Union Street? Please raise the virtual hand in Zoom.
Yes, this is Dr. Carl Bray.
Yes. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. This is Dr. Carl Bray. My spouse, Sarah Gibson Bray, just spoke to you. I have a couple of things commenting on the staff reports and the Heritage Impact Statement, and also the comments made by Mr. Leclerc of FOTEN. First of all, on the policy side, I disagree that this proposal meets Provincial Policy Statement 2020. I draw your attention to two elements in the policies. 1.1.3.3 deals with intensification, and I draw your attention to the words where this can be accommodated. I've been in several LPAT hearings where that was very much a key condition, and where this can be accommodated means what are the specific conditions, what is the urban grain, what are the heritage implications, what are the implications on vegetation, et cetera, et cetera. I don't believe the staff report mentioned 1.3.3, and I think that's an omission. Furthermore, in the PPS, I turn your attention to 1.7.1e, which talks about sense of place. And again, in recent LPAT hearings, that's been a very important element. And it speaks to the character of an area and the need as part of long-term economic development to respect that character and fit in. So conserving features that help define the character, including built heritage resources, et cetera, et cetera. I go back also to the designating bylaw, and Mr. Leary has pointed out that yes, there is a designating bylaw and there's a description, but as he well knows, the designating bylaw was put in place many years ago, and is typical for designating bylaws in Kingston and elsewhere at that time. They focused on the architecture. They really didn't take into account context. And that's why the designating bylaw for 163 is very interesting, because unlike most of the other bylaws, it does mention grounds and spacious grounds. And I think that's something that's very important here. It was emphasized in the letters that we submitted. If you look at the two properties that flank the entrance to Albert Street, they are both set in large grounds, and 151 shares that. So the character flanking Albert Street, particularly along Union, is of larger properties. As you go up Albert, it's different. The grain is different. The property frontages are narrower. It's a different ballgame. And that wasn't taken into account at all in the Heritage Impact Statement, and it doesn't find its way in any real discussion in the staff comments. Moving on to the tree issue, a tree survey should be a precondition, because if the tree survey comes up and says that the tree canopy and the root areas would be affected by development, particularly on Lot 1, then you can't build on Lot 1. So it's putting the cart before the horse to approve a severance on 1 without knowing the impact on the adjacent vegetation. And the conditions put forward in the staff report and in the Heritage Impact Statement merely talk about a vegetative screen. They don't talk about the conservation aspect. One other aspect of the conditions I think is missing is the height of the proposed building. 163 is a very tall building. And if the new property, particularly on Lot 1, is of comparable height, it will be huge. It will overshadow both 163, but also 151 and the adjacent vegetation. And then the one thing that also seems to be missing in the whole enterprise is that I'm sure many of you are familiar in Toronto and in various parts of North America and Europe. Large properties such as 163 work within the existing envelope. That's the form of intensification that makes the most sense and has the least impact on the neighborhood, and often is gives you the highest return. So for example, if 163 were subdivided internally for condominium units, you'd still have the pool, you'd still have the parking, all of those sorts of things, and you'd keep the existing vegetation. So it'd be cheaper in that aspect, and you'd be taking advantage of the value add of the spacious grounds. So I did not see that option being seriously considered. In fact, it wasn't mentioned at all. And likewise, in the Heritage Impact Statement, no other options really beyond tweaking the new infill were considered. And I think that was an omission. So in summary, you've got a unique condition along Union Street that I don't believe has been adequately covered. Certainly on a broad scale, under the official plan and zoning bylaw, as Mr. Leclerc outlined, it does meet, it ticks all those boxes. but the subtleties of this particular site have not been considered. It is not one size fits all. And I really encourage you to understand the difference between the Union Street frontage and the frontage on Albert. Needless to say, my wife and I are not enthusiastic about either severance, but certainly the one on Union Street makes no sense. The traffic safety issues have already been raised, and I think they are serious. Certainly, from our experience at 151, it would be very, very difficult to have a safe exit and entrance off Union Street. So in summary, I think there are things missing from the conditions and therefore missing from the heritage impact statement and the staff reports. And I think options for redevelopment of that property that would suit the owner's needs have not been seriously considered. And there are very good precedents elsewhere for that type of sensitive infill in an urban setting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bray. All right, are there any other members of the public who wish to speak to the application for 163 Union Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom.
There is one other member. Just give us a second to queue him up. Go ahead, Mr. Gibson.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm John Gibson. I'm the brother of Sarah Gibson and brother-in-law of Carl Bray, who just spoke. And I would like to just pick up on Mr. Babin's question with respect to the heritage designation. And I think I understood Mr. Leary to confirm that it is the property, not just the house, that bears the designation. And he went on to say that the designation does not speak to the trees. Well, the designation may not speak expressly to the trees, but it certainly speaks to the spacious grounds. And the proposal, the severance, particularly the severance of the lot adjacent to 151 Union Street, will destroy those spacious grounds. My second point is with respect to the trees themselves. And I hope perhaps you've had a chance to look at the trees, to visit the property and look at the trees. There can be no doubt, if you look at the Foten's site plan on pages 182 and 183, describing the proposed development, that it proposes putting, I think it's 4 parking spaces in a driveway, slam up against the western boundary. All those parking spaces and driveway, or at least half of them, would be under the drip line of the trees. And my understanding is that that presents a very heavy risk of destruction of the trees, and that would destroy the privacy that we currently enjoy at 151 Union Street. And Mr. Leclerc's suggestion that there's no adverse effect on neighboring properties, that would be a profound effect on our property. And so I can currently agree that it should be a prerequisite of this severance application that a tree survey be done. Not after the fact, but now. So those are my submissions, which I hope that you will consider. I share my sister's view. The preferable severance would not be the one adjacent to our property. Thank you very much.
Okay, very good. Thank you for your comments. And I'll just call one final time. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak to the application for 163 Union Street?
Mr. Chair, I'm seeing none.
You've seen, no, we're seeing none. Okay, so I'll now close the public portion of the meeting, and we'll now turn it back to staff or the applicant to address some of the comments we've heard from the public.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I think what I'd like to do is to respond to the more planning-oriented comments first, and then hand it over to my colleague, Andre Scheinman, to speak to some of the heritage points that were raised.
Okay.
So briefly, I will note that the in addition to the heritage permit process, there is a requirement for a development agreement. I was spoken to by Mr. Leary previously, and the specific recommendations from the HIS, this is shown on page 11 of the staff report, are enumerated in this section, and there's some discussion about not only is the vegetated buffer to be maintained, it's to be retained, enhanced, and protected from harm during and after construction. So that would be the vegetated buffer between lot 1 and 151 Union Street. Prior to any development, any construction occurring on that lot through the heritage permit exercise, in order to demonstrate that no harm would occur, a tree inventory and tree preservation plan would form part of that process. That's a typical procedure for that exercise. And not knowing when that construction might occur, it is a little premature to undertake that work at this time. So the development agreement will ensure that that exercise is taken place before any construction happens, before any home is built on that property. So I think that's again, it's a concern that staff and the applicant have taken care to address by putting in this requirement. There was comments about privacy and shading. I would like to reference the plan itself, if that's possible, if the clerk could bring up the concept plan. I'll just very briefly speak to this. So there's a few components here that I think are very worth noting. And what I think one of the significant components to note is the footprint of the house, the building envelope that's shown. At about 98 square meters, it's in the vicinity of about 1,000 square feet. So the footprint that's anticipated on that lot is quite modest. In that it complies with zoning, the dwelling is also limited in its maximum height. So the zoning would limit the maximum height of that building to 10.7 meters. But there's also a limit in the A zone. That's the zone that regulates these properties, that limits the maximum wall height to 7 meters. So you'll note there's a condition 4 on page 11 for the development agreement notes that the roof of the new dwelling has to be a low or medium pitched hip or gable style. So there's the combination of zoning parameters, as well as conditions such as this one, which require a lower profile of roof, will combine to ensure that any house that's designed for this lot is going to be a little bit lower than what the zoning would allow as a maximum. So with a low pitched roof, a small building footprint, and a maximum wall height of 7 meters, the likelihood of achieving a full 10.7 meter height is very limited. And it further ensures that the difference in height, that 3 meters between 7 and 10.7 meters, is all in the form of roof pitch. So the shadow impact that would result from that is quite a bit mitigated as a result. I also note, I think it's worth noting that these properties are on the north side of the road. So they're all on the side that is typically more likely to receive shadow impacts from the properties to the south side, and they're more likely to have a significant shadow impact on the properties to the north. So that consideration, I think, combines with the enhanced front yard setback that would be applicable to lot 1. So you can see here the house at 151 Union Street, shown on the right-hand side, is both closer to the road and significantly deeper than any house that could be constructed within the zoning parameters on lot 1. And the house is also aligned to the west of the lot. So the amount of shadow impact that would result from this house is relatively less, is relatively quite minor compared to what the impact of a property like the existing house might have on the existing house at 163 Union might have on the proposed lot 1. And it's still compatible. It's still typical of what you would see in properties in the A zone areas of the city. The zone allows very reduced setbacks, which inherently allows for a little bit more shadow impact than, say, a house in the country or in the suburbs. And that's recognizing the fact that this is an urban area, that the city wants to see a lot of intensification and wants to see houses built as efficiently as possible. And that a consequence of that is that there's a little bit more shadowing and a little bit more loss of privacy than what you might have in sort of more rural areas of the city. But I also note that the existing vegetation along that property line is likely to have a much more substantial shadow impact, particularly during the time of year when someone might be outside and enjoying their amenity space than any house would have on the severed lot. So I think there's a lot of factors at play here, and I think the expectation of the amount of potential impact from shadowing or privacy is very, very much consistent with what is typical of an urban area, and it will itself be less than the existing vegetation, the existing situation in terms of shadowing. I think the staff report on page 9 has this very helpful table which summarizes, what this table does is it looks at the lot areas and lot frontages for the 3 nearest properties on Union Street and Albert Street. And what this table is showing is that the proposed lot frontages are consistent with the range of what's found. There's a bit of discussion here that there are lots as narrow as 4.5 meters nearby on Union Street, or 7.2 meters on Albert Street. So the range of lot frontages of 10.9 meters and 11.5 meters is very consistent with what exists in the immediate area, as are the lot areas that are shown. And you can see from this table that both the Union Street lot and the Albert Street lot are very consistent with what you can find in the existing area. And that's consistent with the zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw has a minimum lot area of 370 square meters, which is significantly larger than what you might find in some of the suburban areas, but it's well within the range of lots that exist here. I note as well that the retained lot, so the current property is about 1,822 square meters in area. So it's about a half acre altogether. And the retained lot with the house is still going to be just under 1,000 square meters. So it's going to be almost a quarter of an acre. So it's still going to be a fairly substantial property. Still going to have a large area, larger grounds than what you would find in a lot of the other residential properties nearby. And with that, I think that's the gist of the planning questions. Andre, are you available to speak to some of the concerns that have been raised about the heritage designation and so on?
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks to the chair and the committee, and I've been asked by the owner to address some of the comments that have made on relating to heritage issues with regard to this application. And again, I thank the committee for allowing me to do so. Carl Bray has asserted that the original vision and design of the subdivision intentionally featured large corner lots intended to, I think he said, gatepost Albert Street at Union. And a lot was made of this at the last meeting, which I had the pleasure to watch on YouTube. But there doesn't seem to be any documentary evidence to support this. Instead, what is documented is that the Williams plan of subdivision, a university to Collingwood, north of Union, was laid out to create a development pattern that was previously typical. Now, the reference for this comes from the university heritage study, which Dr. Bray knows very well, where the plan's objectives are described as, quote, a rigid grid of small clustered lots expected to produce a more dense settlement pattern. Thus, while we may now appreciate that 2 well-to-do would-be owners each purchased 2 lots at the Albert Union Street corner, that would be 169, what's now 169 Union and 163, the subject property. It doesn't seem correct to impute this to some grand conscious design. There's no mention of that being the case. And in that same excellent report, there is a discussion of the landscape along Union Street from Albert to Barrie. And again, there's no mention of there being some conscious treatment of the area around Albert and Union. it seems that a possible scenario in terms of the actual planning subdivision would be that both lots 929 and 930, which constitute the better part of 163 Union, could have been built on by separate owners right from the get-go, and would have met the intentions of the subdivision planning that was going on. As for the entrance itself to Albert from Union, that would actually remain intact because there's no change contemplated to the west yard of 163 Union. And the only place where you can actually view the entirety of 169 and 163 is from back into the Queen's parking lot. So you have to go back in there, and then you can read both of those properties. But from the sidewalk, from the public sidewalk, you can't take all of that in. You can't see all of that in. So the Keith and the west yard of 163. I would also take the opportunity to point out that 163 Union Street cannot really be described as a country villa, which was again mentioned at the last meeting. Where the building, the country villa, typically defined as where a building set on a rural estate is picturesquely designed to fit into its setting. And Kingston is blessed with quite a number of these. Otterburn, Edge Hill, New Courthouse, to name but a few. 163 is a later version of a more typical Sydenham Ward type urban form, such as you see at Cartwright House, 221 King Street East, or like 85 King Street East, built in 1877 to a design by Power and Son, each fitting quite comfortably into their smaller King Street lots. It also has to be stated that unfortunately, possibly unfortunately, no original landscape features remain at 163 Union. So everything that is there now within the original lot footprint was created after the year 2000. Now, addressing the issue of the phrase spacious grounds. The context is within the 1987 bylaw, and the sentence reads as follows, quote, "The most important feature of this symmetrical cream-colored stucco dwelling set in spacious grounds is the entranceway." The full rest of the bylaw then goes on to describe the entranceway. The key words of the sentence are the subject, most important feature, and the object, the entranceway. The rest is simply description, at least the way it's written here. It does not go on to further discuss the spacious grounds. It ensures, however, that all parties are aware and will preserve all aspects of the entranceway, including all of the central bay. As part of this general description, there is also the mention of a cream-colored stucco dwelling. While the cream-colored stucco appears to be a relatively recent finish, it was brick as shown up till at least 1947. You know, is that to be taken also as an essential feature, the cream-colored stucco? It's all part of the descriptive statement. Though I will certainly agree with Carl that up till relatively recently, the way bylaws, the reasons for designation were written were all over the map and sometimes hard to parse out. I'll just also say that the description of the building or of the property in the buildings of historical and architectural significance makes no reference to spacious grounds. On the point.
Mr. Scheinman, you're breaking up. I'm not sure if you can hear me, but your audio is fading out.
Of the preservation of, and that I think there's agreement, although perhaps a difference in timing between.
So excuse me, Mr. Scheinman, you broke up there. Could you go back about 30 seconds? When you started your new concept, you broke up and we missed what you were saying.
Oh no, oh no. Yeah. Are we back to the keywords of the sentence? Talking about
you finished talking about spacious grounds and you made that point clear, and it was what followed that.
Okay. Yes, okay, so yeah, just to say that in the buildings of architectural and historical significance, there is no reference to spacious grounds.
Yeah.
And then I went, and hopefully that brings you up to my current point, which is that all parties seem interested in the preservation of the treed boundary. And there's, possibly there's discussion about perhaps when the a deeper dive into what that's going to absolutely take takes place. But I think it's a point of general agreement that it is an important objective. I would point out, along with Yuko's discussion of privacy and shading issues, that there are approved alternative methods of driveway construction and parking area construction that avoid excavation or undue compaction of the existing root-containing soil. There's a use of synthetic load-bearing materials, a geogrid, and filled with a no-fines aggregate that allows still free draining through. And these have been used for quite a while in the UK, and I think there's some good examples here. And I think this is the kind of thinking that would need to go into the preservation of that treed boundary while still allowing the application to be approved. And yeah, that's. Oh, just one other point while I have the floor, and that is to the committee members' original question to Ryan Leary about the designation being on the dwelling or on the property. I just want to further clarify that the designation is always on the property. That is the nature of of legal heritage bylaw designation in the province of Ontario. So it'll always be on the title of the property and technically cover the property. And then it's the reasons for designation or the heritage of what we call now the character defining elements or the heritage attributes that guides what can be done on the property. So I just wanted to make that point in case it was still a bit vague. Thank you.
Okay. And I see Mr. Leclerc, you have your hand raised as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to circle back and thank both the members of the public and the committee for the opportunity to respond to these comments. I guess if there are any other questions, we're happy to speak to those.
Thank you. There was one I don't believe that was addressed. I know Dr. Bray was speaking more on the policy side, and he didn't feel that the application met policy statement. I do believe it was 1.3.3, which referred to intensification where it can be accommodated. Would you be able to speak to that?
Certainly, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for pointing that out. 1.1.3.3 is discussed in the staff report, but I'll note at a very high level that the question of whether where opportunities for intensification or redevelopment can be accommodated takes into account existing building stock or areas and the availability of existing or planned infrastructure and services. Under the 2020 PPS, municipalities are required to identify appropriate locations for transit supportive development that relate to this type of intensification. The proposed severances comply with zoning. As previously discussed, they can accommodate houses that also would comply with zoning. And as shown on the concept plan, each house could further accommodate a second residential unit, which the zoning allows, and as shown by the parking arrangement. So I think the question of fundamentally of whether these lots can accommodate the proposed development is quite clear that the area is there, and the question of specifically what those houses should look like and how they would be designed to be compatible with the neighborhood and to maintain the heritage character, which is sort of the subtext of this policy, is a question to be resolved through the detailed design, through the heritage permit process for each house, and the implementation of the development agreement, which would include some of those other aspects that we've spoken about, sort of including maintaining the vegetative buffer between the new Lot 1 and 151 Union Street. You'll note that the development agreement also speaks to creation of a new vegetative buffer between 163 Union Street and the property to the north, and sort of echoing that existing character. So this policy, I think, is fundamental to the proposal and to the intent of some of these conditions, and speaks to the complexity of this application, that there are a number of conditions that are helping to implement this policy. Dr. Bray also noted one other provincial policy.
1.7.1.e, which was the sense, we talked about the sense of place and character in the area.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm looking at that policy right now. For the benefit of everyone in attendance, 1.7.1.1e states, long-term economic prosperity should be supported by encouraging a sense of place, by promoting well-designed built form and cultural planning, and by conserving features that help define character, including built heritage resources and cultural heritage landscapes. And I think the creation of the lots in and of itself is not directly impacted by this policy. Really, where this policy comes in is guiding the design and the development of the lots themselves, as I've noted before. So the heritage permit and the development agreement combine to ensure that this particular policy will be met on a moving forward basis to help establish and encourage that sense of place. And some of the components that I've spoken to previously, the enhanced setback, maintenance of the vegetative buffer, the enhancement of the vegetative buffer, the low profile of the roof, these all combine to help establish that sense of place, and also to give prominence to the existing heritage properties. So 163 Union Street and 151 Union Street are existing. They're both heritage properties, as will Lot 1B, as has been noted, but those are both also heritage buildings that have a prominent character. And by implementing the development agreement and undergoing the heritage permit process, which is itself also public, that sense of place is going to be maintained, and there will be a significant opportunity for the applicant's designers and for city staff and for the public to help influence and maintain that sense of place as those buildings are created. But again, the creation of the sense of place is really the next step in the process. The creation of the lots is what allows that next process to take place.
Okay, thank you. All right, so committee members, do you have any questions of staff or of the applicant based on what the public comments? If you do, raise your hand. If not, shake your head no. Okay, Paul?
So I just want to, it's a comment to my committee members here. Thank you, staff, for all your reports and the consultants and whatnot. But I feel that having walked the property today and seeing it in its current state, I walked it from the other side of the street, from the corners on Albert Street. I think this building seems to be, from what I've read, been in this position since the late 1800s. And I think that this severance will negatively impact the heritage designation of this property and the neighboring property through the characteristics of the neighborhood. So I cannot support the application as it is. So I just want my colleagues to know that in advance. I think the recommendation from the neighbors is to proceed with Lot 2. I have no objection. It's Lot 1 that I have an objection with. I just wanted my colleagues to know that before we actually vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other committee members, do you have any comments? Jordan?
Chair, I'm just wondering if we have any input from the owners of Lot 199 or address 199 Albert.
Staff, could you address that?
Hello, this is Lindsay. I'm the planner on the application.
Hi, Lindsay.
We have not received any communication from the owners of 199.
Okay. Any follow-up to that, Jordan, or no? Okay, any other comments or questions from members of the committee? Okay, Vincent, yes.
Yeah, so I'm happy that my question was answered from the last time about the bylaw. But I wonder, is it possible that nothing could end up being built here based on the requirements, say like the agreement, that it could end up being where nothing could meet the requirements? Is that even a possibility that that could happen? I'm assuming.
Sure. I guess we direct that to staff. Or Yuko, if you want to address or answer that.
Mr. Chair, I think theoretically anything's possible, but the concepts that we've developed and the concept plan that we've developed shows that the lots can be developed in accordance with all of the recommendations that have been provided thus far. The challenge will really be at the design stage will be to ensure that these recommendations from the development agreement and from the heritage permit review process can be implemented. And I think ultimately, as is so often the case in land use planning, that where there are technical challenges of this nature, there's always a solution that's technical in nature, but the challenge is in designing it and in actually achieving that. So I think the short answer to your question is theoretically yes, but the concept plan that we've developed shows that it is theoretically possible as well, and that the applicant's intent is ultimately to design properties that meet all of the criteria that have been set out here to help establish a sense of place and to result in the creation of 2 new homes that are very much within the character of the surrounding area.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from committee members? If not, shake your head no. Oh, Vincent again.
So does say in the development agreement, would it also protect the trees? Is that what that means? Like the vegetation, will there be like a analysis of the trees and stuff that would be done when somebody has to create a development agreement before they want to build? Is that what this means?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. One of the conditions of the consent is that a development agreement be registered on title for each new lot. So should the committee approve the consents tonight and they pass through the appeal period, as part of the exercise of clearing the conditions of consent, we'll be working with city staff and city staff will actually draft this development agreement in consultation with their heritage staff and their legal staff to ensure that all of the recommendations as itemized on page 11 are met. So I think the condition that we've spoken to before, requirement to retain, enhance, and protect from harm during and after construction the existing vegetation / buffer between lot 1 and 151 Union Street, that will be one of the requirements of the development agreement that's registered on title. So in order to achieve any building permit, the responsibility of an owner will be to demonstrate how they're meeting this criteria. And that's one of those types of criteria that's impossible to meet without undertaking a tree inventory and a tree preservation plan to learn about the health of the trees and to identify what measures need to be put in place and installed on the site to protect those trees, up to and including some of those types of measures that were identified by Mr. Scheinman, including alternative measures, alternative construction materials for driveways and so on, including where excavation can take place on the site. All of those things can be examined as part of the tree preservation exercise. And under this development agreement, they must be.
Okay, thank you. And Jordan, did you have a follow-up?
I answered it myself, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from committee members? Okay, so then we'll proceed to the our final place on the format. I'm going to ask a member of the committee for a motion and somebody to second it. So moved by Somnath and seconded by, we have a seconder for the motion. We need a seconder so we can at least vote on it. Okay, so seconded by Jordan. Okay, any discussion? No discussion. Okay, so then we'll go straight to a vote. So Somnath, your motion is to approve, correct? Okay, so all right, so all in favor of the motion to approve, raise your hand. And all opposed to the motion, raise your hand. And okay, so it looks like it's been defeated 4-1. All right, so that, James, yes?
Mr. Chair, we'll just turn to Mr. Park for a moment to speak to the ramifications of a defeated motion and what the committee needs to include in the notice of decision. So
thank you.
Quickly.
Okay, Tim, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair. As the staff report outlined, the consents that were applied for met the intent of the provincial policy statement, as well as the city's official plan and zoning bylaw. So in the committee's decision, they have to clearly state the reason for the refusal.
Okay. All right, and so is that something that we can prepare over the next week, or is something you need? Like, what's the timing on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask Mr. Thompson to advise on the timing of when the decision needs to be provided.
Okay.
We need that now, so it's just treated as a complete file. If you'd like to take a brief recess to give us some thought, we could reconvene in a few moments, if that would be best.
Okay, yeah, if we can do that, yeah, why don't we take a brief recess and then the committee members will convene and to come up with the rationale.
I see 6:46 on my clock. Would you like 5 minutes to 6:51 or 6:55?
Yeah, 5 minutes would be good. So will you be taking the just putting the 5 of us in a private room?
No, I think we'll just do this publicly, but
Okay.
if you need some time just to reflect,
Sure.
You can come back in a few moments. We'll just put everyone on mute.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if you're ready, I'll turn your microphone back on and we can see how we're doing.
Mute it there. Thank you. Okay, so committee members, I know, Paul, do you want to start maybe with a policy rationale?
2 points, Mr. Chair. On page 11 of 14 of the document, it starts with this sentence, "We concur." Just want to make sure you're there.
Okay, hang on just 1 second. So I'm sorry, it was page 11 of 14?
Yeah, that's the top of the page.
Okay, yep.
And it says, "We concur that the impact assessment and mitigations for the HIS, while the spacious grounds are noted in the designated bylaw, the emphasis for the reasons for designation is not the grounds." But we heard earlier on that it's more than the building itself, it's also the property. So there's a conflicting statement here from what we've been provided. And I'm going to go back a few pages as well, Mr. Chair, in the staff report. And I'm going to reference the top of page 8 of 14.
Yes.
Number B, or item B, the resulting lot fabric and proposed residential lot are compatible with the general pattern of adjacent lots. I don't think that is reflected as well in this application. Thank you.
Okay. All right, good. And Vincent, did you have a comment to that?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt. Will we be able to take another brief recess just for a moment?
Sure. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, Commissioner Agnew will be joining us in 2 or 3 seconds just to provide a little bit of clarification.
Okay, thank you.
I apologize for the delay.
No problem.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Agnew's here now. We apologize for the delay. May she speak to the committee?
Yeah, not a problem. Paige, glad to have you.
Hi, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. I see you've got a bit of a tropical background going on there. That's pretty cool. I haven't figured out how to do that, but thank you for allowing me to join the meeting late. I understand that the committee is currently deliberating on 163 Union.
That's correct.
Some concerns that have been identified relative to the recommendation that's before you. So I've just joined the call to see if I could assist with the matter at all and be part of the discussion.
Sure. So the committee has taken a vote and would have denied the application. And we were just going through our rationale for doing so. Yeah, so that's kind of where we're at.
Okay, so the committee's working on the land use related rationale for the non-support of the application that's before you.
That's right.
And could I understand that just the basis of what some of the challenges are to see if I could assist at all, or is the committee still going to take a recess to discuss that amongst themselves?
I don't know that we need to take a recess. I think we know. I mean, Mr. Babin has already provided his rationale. He's referenced it back to several pages of the comprehensive report. And I know personally, I echo that. One of my personal feelings is that I don't believe that the application results in a preservation nor a respect for the historical designation, which we've had a really good discussion that doesn't follow just the house. It actually follows the whole property. So that's where I'm at. And I think we had other members of the committee that were going to be giving their input as well.
Okay.
All right. So Jordan, did you want to chime in on that?
Sure, I'll be broad. Proactivity in relation to the tree line. I like proactive assurances as opposed to reactionary consequences. I'm not convinced that the proposal is appropriate for the neighborhood or the community as a whole, despite the new proposed lots being within the realm of the same size as neighboring lots. I echo your thoughts, Mr. Chair, on the historical designation and the respect for the entirety of the property. I'm just not comfortable. Those are my submissions.
Okay. Thank you. And Vincent, did you have a comment as well?
Yeah, my comment was just more in relation to only lot 1. I'm okay with lot 2. Had to do with, yeah, I echo Mr. Babin's comments too about historical preservation. My biggest problem was with preservation of those trees. Also, that's one of them, and the traffic. It seems like it's a little, you're trying to jam something very small or something into a very small area that has like a lot going on there too. So I think that it would impact the historical aspect of it also.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And any other comments from any other committee members?
Mr. Chair,
No.
I'll note that the agent has his hand. I'll leave that to your discretion on whether or not you wish to hear from
Not
him again.
not at this point. We've actually already taken our made our vote. We've made our decision, and we've just provided our rationale. So that's I think we've fulfilled our duty in this respect. Okay, Anne Marie, I see you raising your hand.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just a question that I had, just to clarify. So these are two different applications, D10-046-2009. That is lot 1. So that there appears to be concerns with lot 1. And then there is a D10-047-2019, which is specifically for lot 2. So these are two separate applications made under the same address. Just to seek clarification if 2 votes need to be made, one for each application.
Yeah, I believe you're right. We definitely would need 2 votes. So the first vote was for. I'm sorry, I just have to scroll back here. What was the? Actually, I can do it this way. So the first item was D10-046. And D10-046 was for What was that? I'm sorry, Anne Marie. What was the lot?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is lot 1. That is D10-046.
Okay, and there are 2 lots indicated on the map. 2 lot 1s rather. So we'll just have to figure out which one. Can you give me an address? Just scrolling back. Okay, so there's lot 1 retained. So lot 1 severed would be the one on Union Street. Correct? Are we correct on that?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So the first vote we had was for lot 1 on Union Street, and I believe that's the one that Mr. Babin and Mr. Chinani said they would not support. Am I correct in that? Shake heads, yes. Yep. Okay, that's correct. Okay, so our committee members were all in agreement on that. That one has been defeated. So we'll now take a vote for the second application, which is D10-047, which would be for the Albert Street. So can I have a motion from somebody to approve this? So Paul. So moved by Paul, and seconded by.
Mr. Chair, just for.
Yep, James.
Mr. I was just going to say, because the 2 files weren't voted on separately the first time, it might be cleanest just if we reconsidered the motion as a whole, revote on lot 1, and separate the 2 clauses,
Okay.
and then vote 1 and then lot 2 separately. So if the mover and seconder, who Mr. Singha and Mr. Teknos Levy would like to move reconsideration, we can put the whole recommendation on the floor, then we can separate it and to the 2 properties, and then that way it's just a little bit more cleaner rather than.
Okay. Are you okay with that, member? So Paul and Jordan, you okay with that? Okay, so that's what we'll do. So do we need a motion for reconsideration or motion to retract?
Yes, please. So if the mover and seconder, Mr. Levy, are okay with that, we'll move reconsideration.
Okay, that's what we'll do. Okay, so moved by Paul and seconded by Jordan to reconsider. All in favor, raise your hand. And okay, and that's carried. Okay, so reconsider. All right, so now we'll do a motion for D10-046, which is for lot 1 on Union Street. So can I have somebody move approval of that? So moved by Somnath and seconded by, I need a seconder. Okay, seconded by Paul. All right, and discussion. Okay, so all in favor, raise your hand. And opposed, raise your hand. Yeah, all right, and that's been defeated. Okay, so our second application was for D10-047, which was for the Albert Street property. So can I have somebody move approval of that? Okay, so moved by Paul and seconded by Somnath. Any discussion? Okay, so all in favor, raise your hand. All right, and opposed, raise your hand. All right, and that would be carried. So moved by Paul, Somnath, and Vincent. Yep.
I will just confirm that the previous comments related to defeated motion stand as per previously indicated, and none of them applied to the second file.
Well, if the second file is carried, then the defeating comments would not apply, I don't think.
Okay.
Okay.
No, I just wanted to ensure that all the comments were related. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sure. I think we're good on that. Okay. All right, so that's that. So the applicant and the members of the public can leave. Thanks very much for your time and your consideration and your comments. Thanks so much for that. Okay, so we'll just do a few minutes of paperwork here and then we'll carry on. Okay, so our next item on the agenda is number 7A. It's an application for consent. Anne-Marie, can I have you introduce this for us, please?
Yes, certainly. Good evening. The application is for consent, file number D10-048-2019 for 3028 Princess Street and 950 to 956 Woodhaven Drive. The owner is Michelle Valdastia, and 2676628 Ontario Inc. The applicant is Photon Consultants. The purpose and effect of the application is to transfer approximately 2,948 square meters of land from 3028 Princess Street to 950 Woodhaven Drive. The frontage will not be changed and no new lots will be created. Further, no development is proposed as part of this application. I would like to provide a little bit of background information here. The province has released an amendment to Ontario Regulation 149/20 under the Planning Act, which came into effect today. The notice of decision for this application currently contains the following wording. So what this application indicates in the notice of decision is in accordance with Ontario Regulation 149/20, this is related to the declared emergency made under the Planning Act. The period of the COVID-19 emergency is not included for the purposes of calculating the above noted time frame. This new regulation as of today indicates that timelines to fulfill the conditions for this consent application is no longer suspended. For this application, we recommend that the wording in the notice of decision as it stands be removed in order to reflect this change. So what this means is that before, as part of the COVID emergency, the timelines to fulfill the conditions was suspended. Now that we've received new information from the province today, the timeline to fulfill the conditions is no longer suspended. So we would like to propose or recommend that the wording in the notice of decision be removed to reflect this.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much for that. And if you're following along, you're going to find this on page 71 of the agenda package. Okay. So what I'll do is I'm going to call for the applicant and or their agent to identify themselves and introduce themselves by name and address, please. This is for 3028 Princess Street and Woodhaven Drive.
Thank you. And good evening.
I'm sorry, James, go ahead.
I was just going to mention that I believe that Mr. Leclerc is again the agent.
Okay, Mr. Leclerc.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, James. My name is Yuko Leclerc. I am a land use planner with Photon Planning and Design, and I'm here representing the owners of the subject properties at 3028 Princess Street, as well as 950 to 956 Woodhaven Drive. I have reviewed the staff report recommending approval of this and note that the recommendation for approval includes a number of conditions. Among those conditions is effectively that the existing dwelling and the existing structures on the lot, including the septic system at 3028 Princess Street, will all have to be removed or decommissioned. I've also received the public correspondence. I think there have been 2 pieces of correspondence provided, and I have reviewed those and received them. I can speak to those certainly if the committee has any questions or has any specific queries associated with that correspondence, and I'm happy to respond to any questions or comments from the committee as well. And I thank you for the opportunity. Do I need to state my address again for the record?
No, that's fine. We have that already. Thanks very much for the input. Okay, so I'll turn it over to the committee members. Do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff about this application? And if you do, just raise your physical hand. Okay, so Paul?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering what's the purpose of this land transfer? Thank you.
That's a good question. And so Yuko, Mr. Leclerc, do you want to address that?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, certainly. There's sort of 2 components. One is that the rear portion of the lot, and if it's possible to bring up the plan again, I think this is very helpful. So the 2 properties are subject to 3 different zones. So the front portion of 3028 Princess Street, which would be the retained lot, is zoned R1. And then the 950 to 956 Woodhaven Drive property is in a site-specific, I believe it's R1-10 zone. It is noted in the staff report, R2-10, excuse me. And then the balance, the sort of the rear portion of 3028 Princess Street, where there's currently a septic system and this detached accessory building that's at the rear. There's no record of any permit associated with the construction of that building. That whole rear portion is Zone D. And with the development, it's Zone D for development. And what the development zone is that it's functionally a holding zone. It allows what's there at the present time, but it doesn't allow any new construction or any new development. So the applicants, recognizing that this portion of the lot cannot be developed without a land use planning process one way or another, are intending to consolidate that with their other land holdings at 950 to 956 Woodhaven Drive to facilitate the ultimate development of that site. You know, I note again, since it's Zone D for development, there's nothing that can be done with that property without some kind of development application. And what that will do is that it'll allow the retained lot to be developed independently of the balance of the land. So if the applicants wanted to construct a new single detached dwelling on that property, for example, they would have the ability to do so independently of the balance of the site. So it's effectively just taking some land that's intended for future development and changing it from one holding to another to make things functionally easier for the balance of the subject property. I note as well that because the property is currently sort of a mix of private and municipal servicing, it benefits from a certain degree of legal non-conforming and legal non-complying status. By going through this process and by undertaking these consent applications, this lot addition, I should say, and removing the private services from that property, it would actually no longer be possible to develop that site with private services. So any future development of that property will have to be undertaken with municipal servicing, which is a net improvement from the municipality's perspective. You're looking at a property that's too small really for private services, and it shouldn't be on private services this far into the urban boundary especially. So what this will do is it will require that lot be connected into the municipal infrastructure that's already there. Through you, Mr. Chair, I hope that answers the question, but if not, I can speak further.
Yep, I see an affirmative head. Okay, so committee members, do you have any other questions for staff or for the applicant? No, Somnath?
Yeah, the question I had was, I see 3036. Is that owned by someone else apart from the applicant?
Through you, Mr. Chair, 3036 is not owned by the applicant.
Check. Thanks.
Okay. And any other questions for the applicant or staff? And I'm not seeing any. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll open the public portion of the meeting. Are there any members of the public here to speak to the application for 3028 Princess Street and Woodhaven Drive? If you do, please raise your hand, virtual hand in Zoom. I'll call a second time. Are any members of the public here to speak to the application for consent for 3028 Princess Street on the corner of Woodhaven Drive? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And I'll call one third and final time. Are any members of the public here to speak to the application for 3028 Princess Street on the corner of Woodhaven Drive? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And I'm seeing none. So I'll now close the public portion of the meeting and I'll turn it back to the committee for a motion. So committee members, what would you like to do? So Paul is moving. Okay, so Paul moves with the recommendations as amended, I think, according to Anne-Marie, and seconded by Somnath. All right, any discussion on that? So all in favor, raise your physical hand. And that's unanimously carried. So that's that. Yeah, the applicant may leave. Thank you. Okay, so now we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is 7B, which is an application for consent and easement. So Anne-Marie, could I have you introduce this for us, please?
Hello, this is an application for consent for easements, file number D10-011-2020 for the address of 847 Development Drive. The owner is Ivy Lee Kitchen Supplies and the applicant is Nathan Richard. Purpose and effect of the applications is to create a right-of-way to the abutting property to allow access to parking areas and an easement to control the flow of stormwater. 847 Development Drive is being developed with a 158-unit apartment building, and 809 Development Drive is being developed with an 18-unit stacked townhouse. The right-of-way will allow the two properties to share a single entrance located on 847 Development Drive. The easement will allow the stormwater drainage plans for both properties to be coordinated. I leave this in your hands.
Great, and thanks for that correction, Anne-Marie. My bad over here. You'll find this on page 91 of the agenda package. So I'll ask the applicant or their agent to identify themselves by name and address, please.
Sure, Mr. Chair, Mr. Tao is actually present, I believe, to represent this file. Go ahead.
Okay,
Mr. Tao.
Mr. Tao, yep.
Hi, yep, my name is Mark Tao. I'm a planner with IBI Group. So we are the planning consultant for the applicant in this case. It's our address 650 Dalton Avenue, Kingston, Ontario. So the proposal is, as stated in the report, is to simply create an easement over 809 Development Drive in favor of 847 Development Drive. This is the outcome of a previous rezoning that was completed and approved by council earlier this year, and also related to two ongoing site plan control applications to implement and control development on both of the properties. So just referring to the staff report, the key map, actually, Exhibit A, just shows the extent of the two proposed easements, one being the right-of-way to provide access over the larger 847 Development Drive to the rear yard parking area of 809 Development Drive. So the intention is that there be a shared access from Development Drive to both of these properties. 809 is being developed with 18 stacked townhouse units, and 847 is being developed with an apartment building. So the intention was to minimize the number of driveways entering onto Development Drive, having a shared entrance in this location provided for a four-way intersection, essentially like an aligned intersection at Development Drive, versus an offset intersection for 809 and an additional intersection for 847. So the concept of development was contemplated through the rezoning and is currently going through the final stages of site plan review with the city. And so that's the gist of it. We have reviewed the staff report and are supportive of the recommendation. We'd hoped that we wouldn't have to go to committee because usually this type of application is a delegated approval authority, but there was a concern from a neighbor to the west about the location of the entrance. And just to summarize, the application here isn't to authorize an entrance, it's really to authorize an easement so that 809 can use the existing entrance already approved for 847. So the application doesn't really impact where the entrance would be. If the easement weren't granted, the alternative would be that 809 would have to have at least one separate entrance onto Development Drive. So we would not remove the entrance that's proposed. We'd actually be creating a further entrance onto Development Drive, which I don't think would address the neighbors' concerns, because their concerns seem to be that the entrance was too close to their property, too close to the intersection and the institutional use to the west. So just to clarify that the application wouldn't change even if we're denied or we weren't asking for it. These entrances would still be there. This application will actually remove the need for a separate entrance onto Development Drive. So thank you.
Very good.
Any questions?
Yep.
Happy.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so I'll turn it over to the members of the committee. Do you have any questions for the applicant's agent or staff members? Please raise your physical hand. And Jordan?
A question for Mr. Tao. So Mr. Tao, what you're saying is if we don't approve this, it's likely that that neighbor will be hindered even further by virtue of a second entrance to the property, given that some entrance will be required for that building. Is that right?
Mr. Tao?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that's correct. We would need, it is an existing lot of record already, so we would need to have some entrance to get to the to the site. So yeah, that's the answer.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant or for staff? If not, just shake your head no. No? Okay, so what I'll do now is open the public portion of the meeting. Are any members of the public here this evening to speak to the application for 847 Development Drive? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And I'll call a second time. Are any members of the public here to speak to the application for 847 Development Drive? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. I'm not seeing any. I'll call one third and final time. Are any members of the public with us this evening who wish to speak to the application for 847 Development Drive? Please raise your virtual hand. And I'm seeing none, so I'll close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee for a motion. So moved by Paul and seconded by Jordan. Okay, for approval. Any discussion? So all in favor, raise your hand. Yeah, and that's unanimously carried as well. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll get to our next agenda item. I'll see if I can get it right this time. It's number 7C, which is an application for minor variance. Anne-Marie, can I have you introduce this?
Mr. Chair, this is application for a minor variance, file number D13-019-2020. The address is 87 Cataraqui Street. The owners are Ian McIntyre and Sarah Tsang. The applicant is Matt Gervin. The purpose and effect of the application is to permit a reduction in minimum side yard width and to permit an increase to the maximum permitted building depth to facilitate a replacement rear yard addition with approximately 11.8 square meters of additional lot coverage. I leave this in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you'll find this on page 118 of the agenda package this evening. So could I have the applicant or their agent identify themselves by name and address, please?
Yes, it's Matt Gervin. We are the agent for the owners. I believe the owners are listening as well. And I will turn this over to my associate, Glenn Fast, to make a couple of comments.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
It's Glenn Fast, 250 Mowat Avenue. I work for Mac. It's pretty basic application. The owners are a young, growing family, and we're adding a small 2-story addition to the rear. To accomplish this, we need variance for the average building depth of 1.94 meters and a variance for the width of 0.21 meters. That's what we're asking for.
Okay, thank you very much. So committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff? If so, just raise your physical hand so I can see. And I'm seeing none. So we'll go over to the public portion. Are there any members of the public who are here to speak to the application for 87 Cataraqui Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. I'll call a second time. Are there any members of the public here this evening who wish to speak to the application for 87 Cataraqui Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And I'll call a third and final time. Are any members of the public here to speak to the application for 87 Cataraqui Street? Please raise your virtual hand. And I'm seeing none. So we'll turn it back over to the committee for a motion. So moved by Paul and seconded by Somnath. Any discussion? So all in favor, raise your physical hand. And that's unanimously carried. Thank you. Okay, so our next application is item number 7D, which is an application for minor variance. Anne-Marie, could I have you introduce this for us?
Hello, this is an application for a minor variance. The file number is D13-017-2020 for the address of 826 Old Colony Road. The owner is Lauren Christie and the applicant is also Lauren Christie. The purpose and effect of the application is to permit a reduction in minimum side minimum setback to the southern interior lot line to facilitate the construction of a 232.5 square foot basement staircase. I leave this in your hands.
Thank you very much. And you'll find this on page 143 of the agenda package. So could I have the applicant or their agent identify themselves by name and address, please?
Oh, hi there. My name's Lauren Christie. I live at 826 Old Colony Road. I'm the applicant.
Okay. Is there anything further you wish to add to the application we have before us? Not at all? Oh, that's fine. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll turn it over to the committee. Do you have committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff? If so, raise your hand. If not, shake your head no. I see lots of shaking heads. Okay, so I'll open up the public portion of the meeting and ask any member of the public, if you're here to speak to the application for 826 Old Colony Road, please raise your virtual hand.
Mr. Chair, there are no longer members of the public in the other
Okay.
room.
All right, so I'm just going to close the public portion of the meeting and then turn it back to the committee for a motion. So moved by Vincent, seconded by Jordan. Any discussion on that? So all in favor, raise your hand. And that's unanimously carried. That's that. So you may leave. Thanks, Ms. Christie. All right, and I believe our last application is for a minor variance. Anne-Marie, can I have you introduce this for us, please?
Yes, this is an application for a minor variance for file number D13-018-2020. The address is 35 to 39 Montreal Street. The owner is Slatko Banik, and the applicant is Photon Consultants with Jennifer Wood. The purpose and effect of the application is to allow an additional residential unit within the existing 3-story mixed commercial residential structure without providing a parking space or providing amenity area. The application would increase the total residential units within the existing structure from 10 to 11. I leave this in your hands.
Thank you very much. And you'll find this on page 162 of the agenda package. So I'm going to ask the applicant to identify themselves by name and address, please.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Wood. I'm a land use planner with Photon Planning and Design, and our office address is 6 Cataraqui Street, Suite 108.
Good, thank you. Is there anything further you wanted to add to this application?
Not in particular. I would just say that I have read the staff and agree with the recommendations put forward.
Okay, very good. So I'll now turn it over to the committee and ask committee members if you have any questions for either the applicant or for staff. So Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My understanding is that it's already an 11th unit in the building, and this is the purpose of this application is to conform with law. But is there also renovation planned, because there's reference to a building permit in the application? Thank you.
So Ms. Wood, can you address that?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, just putting my unmute back off. So yeah, it's a good question, and it speaks to actually how it was discovered that this 11th unit was in fact existing for 25 years illegally. It was actually a building permit that was being taken out for a completely separate unit in the building for a bathroom renovation. And at that time, through the building permit review process, inspections, it was discovered that there's in fact an 11th unit in this building, a bachelor unit that was established in 1995. There was a previous variance in the 90s to permit an increased density to 10 units, but shortly thereafter an 11th unit was introduced without planning approval. So it was actually a building permit related to a completely different unit that triggered our understanding of the need for this variance.
Okay, good. Committee members, any other questions for the applicant or staff? And I'm seeing none, so we'll open the public portion of the meeting. And correct me if I'm wrong, James, I see no public members in the public gallery. So we will close the public portion of the meeting and I'll come back to the committee for a motion. So moved by Paul and seconded by Vincent. Any discussion on that? So all in favor, raise your hands. And that's unanimously carried. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we'll just move on with our agenda. So I have no notices of motion. The next part on the agenda would be the other business delegated authority applications in progress. So committee members, have you had a chance to review them? Do you have any questions or comments about them? No, I'm seeing none. Okay, so then we'll move on to correspondence, which we don't have any. Now we're looking for confirmation of the minutes from the May 5th meeting. I'm sorry, May 11th meeting. So has everybody had a chance to review them? Yeah, so Jordan, did you have a comment or? No? You're going to move approval? Okay, so Jordan is moving approval of the minutes of May 11th, and Somnath, you seconding that? Any discussion? None, so all in favor, raise your hands. And that is carried. And the date of the next meeting is set for July the 20th. It's just so everybody knows. And now we're looking for a motion to adjourn at 7:33 p.m. So moved by Paul
Mr.
and
Chair, before.
Yep.
Sorry,
James?
Mr. Chair. Before we leave, I believe this is Anne Marie's last meeting with the group for a few months, and perhaps she has her hand raised, so I'll let her take over if she'd like to speak.
Sure, please, Anne Marie. Yeah.
Hi, good evening. I just want to go back to one of the applications here, 847 Development Drive. When I spoke about the new regulations and the COVID timelines and that sort of thing, I just want to indicate that piece in removing the wording with regards to that also applies to that application as well.
Right. Oh,
okay, so the notice of decision will be changed to
yes,
to reflect that, as
okay.
it's also a consent application, just so that
okay.
it's on the record. Okay.
Good, thank you.
And thank you very much. It was a pleasure working with you all, staff, and everyone else. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Will we see you back or?
Yeah, you'll see me back.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, that's good. You've been really good to work with as well, Anne Marie. Very easy to work with. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so we had a motion to adjourn moved by Paul, seconded by Vincent. So all in favor, raise your hand. And that's carried. So we adjourn at 7:34 p.m. All right, thanks everybody. See you in a month, 4 weeks. Take care.